Welcome to the American Institute of Stress's official podcast, Finding Contentment. The goal of this podcast is to highlight new information about stress and stress management techniques. While we understand that stress is a very personalized issue and different for everyone, we hope to help you find your own way to contentment.
Hey, greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the American Institute of Stress's official podcast, Finding Contentment. I'm your host and executive director. It's Will Heckman. Glad to see you guys coming back again and joining us. Please remember to go to stress.org and subscribe to our magazines, which are both free, Contentment and Combat Stress. Absolutely free. A lot of good information there. Just go there and don't forget to subscribe. And, while I'm talking about subscribing, I got to remind you as a YouTuber to hit the subscribe button that is down there somewhere. Hit the like button, hit the bell. I'm always glad to see that. And it's positive feedback. It keeps me going. Listen, what we're going to be talking about today is not something we have not discussed before in this show. But it is so important. You know that numerous studies show that job stress is far and away the major source of stress for American and other adults all around the world, and that has escalated progressively over the past few decades. I've seen it myself. And increased levels of job stress, as assessed by the perception of having little control, but lots of demands, have demonstrated to be associated with increased rates of heart attack, hypertension, other mental disorders, and other physical disorders. And although at the Institute of American Stress, we often get asked to construct lists, I always love those requests, of the most and least stressful occupations. The truth is, such rankings have little importance for several reasons. It's not the job, but the person and the environment of that job and how well they fit that matters. Some individuals thrive in time-urgent pressure cooker of life, or as the Eagles used to say, life in the fast lane, having to perform several duties at the same time, a list of things to do that would overwhelm most of us. These people are fine doing that, provided they perceive that they're in control. And they would be severely stressed by dull and dead-end assembly line work enjoyed by others who shun responsibilities and simply don't want to perform a task that is well within their capabilities. And the stresses that, say, policemen or high school teachers working in an inner city environment are subject to may be quite different than those experienced by their counterparts in rural areas or country areas. So it's necessary to keep this in mind when sweeping statements are made about the degree of stress in teachers or first responders or physicians and all other occupations. Stress levels, as I've said before, can be different for every individual for different situations. And one of the people that we don't talk about enough who experience a lot of stress and a lot of issues are executives. We don't always perceive executives as having problems of say, stress levels or mental issues, but they do. And I wanted to bring on our show today somebody who is really an expert in it, Nick Jonsson. And Nick is a #1 international best-selling author. He's dedicated to raising awareness and eliminating the stigma around the phenomenon of executive loneliness, which he has written a book about. And he has identified feelings of isolation and depression and personal struggles that he himself has had to grapple with and to conquer. And they're a lot more widespread than you think. He is also the co-founder and managing director of the Singapore branch of EGN, which is Executives Global Network. Executives Global Network. Nick is passionate about matching senior executives in a confidential peer group where they can help each other face challenges and identify opportunities. And Nick has worked across Asia, Australia, Europe. He's been representing major international firms. He's acquired expertise in international general management, direct sales, marketing. He's also been entrusted to serve as the vice chairman of the Nordic Chamber of Commerce in Ho Chi Minh City and the vice chairman of AmCham Vietnam Direct Sailing Committee, the positions that further demonstrate his ability to add value on a global scale. And he's a very highly motivated and guy and individual. He enjoys participating in marathon and Ironman events, which I personally think is torture. Nick also thrives under the adrenaline of speaking. He's a well-known speaker. He gives great seminars and events. And if you want to know more about him, just go to nickjonsson.com. It's the easiest way. So please join me in welcoming my guest, Nick Jonsson. Hi, Nick.
I will. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. And indeed, I will invite you to join me for my next Ironman event.
Yeah, if you could turn back the clock to when I was your age, I got you, brother. But now I'm happy playing a game of tennis and not feeling it for 3 days. I think
Fantastic.
Advil, I'm going to buy stock in Advil because I'm using it more than anything. Hey, listen, Nick, the thing I wanted to start with you, I've read some of your articles. Your book is outstanding. But I wanted to know how you got started. You personally got started working in the field of mental health. And I know it was due to some personal struggle. So tell us that story. We really want to hear about it.
Well, being a goal-driven executive, it started already back in my studies. First I failed in my university studies, but once I found a way to, become top of the class and getting a scholarship, I became almost obsessed with that. I wanted to top and be the best in everything, and that is an addictive feeling. And perhaps it was that insecurity I had in me that fueled me and drove me to deliver and to be on the top finally. So I thought I had arrived, that started that feeling in the university. Then coming into the work life, I approached it in the same way. And I remember a talk I listened to by the dean of the school where I studied, and that was with me in my working years. He said, how come when you are in sport, the person who's number 2 is the first loser? If you see a football match, you see the final, the team who's number 2, they're crying, walking off the pitch. And he said, why do we approach our working life like that? Shouldn't we be the best? And that was sort of the mentality I approached my career. And it was a success, but it also meant that it was quite lonely. I elbowed my way up to the top, thinking I'm going to become a managing director, have the big package. And no matter what it took, I would be there. And it took me about 11 years from university to becoming basically where I wanted. I had arrived with a fantastic package. I was managing 72 hospitals and clinics. In my company was 1,400 staff. And this was a big international medical company. So I had the biggest role in the world for them.
It sounds like a lot of pressure to me, to be honest with you. We've had this discussion recently with a young man probably around your age, Eric Kusin, and his story was very compelling of what happened to him just because of the stress. He was involved in major league sports. So very simple. And you know what's funny is that you were talking about being driven, and it started in school. I got to tell you, that's a common theme that I hear. Straight A students who really work hard and continue doing that into their work life lose that balance. Do you think that's what happened to you? And so how did you start in the mental health field then?
Yeah, so about the student life, then indeed, when I was younger, I was bullied. I was very average, but eventually I found a way how to perform better. It was just by working harder. But if you put in double the amount of hours from everyone, you're going to come out on top, and that's what I found out. But to come into the work life, then to work so hard, it's also put a huge stress and pressure on yourself. You don't balance yourself in your life, and indeed, things came to issues around 2014, 2015. I basically didn't share with anyone all the challenges I had in my workplace. I didn't have a coach, I didn't have a mentor, and that's where I should have started. I should probably address the issues right away before they became too bad. And because I didn't have anyone to disclose it to, I didn't even talk to my wife at the time about it. I felt she won't understand me anyway, she won't get this. So it went so far that I just resigned from the job. But as I resigned from the job, I also pushed my wife away from me and asked for a divorce. I needed time by myself, I thought. But there I was, and my new friend and my new employer became a bottle of beer instead. So I thought I deserved to enjoy my life, and I went into, so from 2015 to 2017, I did very little but jumping from job to job and getting an alcohol addiction.
And how did that resolve itself?
So basically, in 2018, I hit rock bottom. I had become a daily drinker at this time, and I didn't know which way to get out. And it was so bad that in April 2018, I wrote my will, my testament, and I sent this to my then ex-wife and my parents and so on. And I said that the way I'm feeling now, I don't know if I can get out of this. So I just want to make sure I don't leave a mess behind me. And since I'm living away from you, I lived then in Asia and they lived back in Europe. I didn't want them to have a mess, looking up where my bank accounts and everything else. I also signed up for life insurance indeed, because my son then, so he should have something if I leave. And I have to say here, Will, I was not suicidal, but I understood that I was on the journey to die. So you can say that it was a slow grinding suicide, but I didn't know how to stop. I who used to be so controlling and hard on myself with the biggest willpower, couldn't stop. I used to have blocks of taking a few weeks off alcohol, but here I was in a stage where I couldn't. I tried to stop, but I couldn't.
And it's funny, but in the stress field, we talk about people who end up with a diagnosable problem and they end up on a medication from a doctor or something like that. And the most common medication that is self-medicated is alcohol. Because people come home, they'll have a drink, and that's how it starts. And all of a sudden you need that to unwind and to relieve that stress. So how did your journey end with the alcohol? How did you get off of that?
So at this time, by the grace of a power bigger than myself, I met a new wife, and about 3 weeks into our marriage, and by the way, on the outside, she didn't see I had any issues. People didn't know. They thought I was having a good life, and everyone said, it's good on you, Nick, to enjoy yourself a bit. You've been working too hard. You deserve this time. But inside, I was not well. But I told her after 3 weeks into our marriage how we felt, and she immediately listened. She listened with empathy, and she said, well, no problems. We sort this out. And before I knew it, and before I realized what happened, she called up a doctor, and she just dragged me to the doctor, and she was with me in there, just telling him the truth. And I was, oh my God. And it was like the whole world collapsing around me. I thought, this is impossible. You cannot tell someone about this. This is something that we need to keep secret. But of course, the doctor immediately gave support and so on. And I felt, by telling my wife and just the doctor, I immediately, about half of my problems were gone. Half of the feelings were gone. I felt I was not alone anymore. And from there, everything moved. And, I got medication, of course, to deal with all the withdrawal from the alcohol and so on. But also then what we did after that, my wife took me then to a friend of ours who received support before, who had mental health issues before, who also had an alcohol addiction before. And she immediately said, so here was the third person in a day who find out what has happened to me. And she said, Nick, your smile will come back. You will be fine. Let me support you with this. So immediately again, I felt hope. And she then introduced me to an anonymous support group where there was other problem drinkers who'd gone through this before. And I understood, well, this is common. I'm not alone. And that was the start of the recovery.
It really is the start of any recovery. First of all, getting some help. That at AIS we talk about that all the time, and you talked about it a little bit too. That when you didn't go for help and you didn't discuss it with anybody, and that feeling of being all alone, that's got to make it so much worse. because when you get to the point where you're starting to write notes to everybody in case I'm not suicidal, but just in case, it was a real awakening for you. And those of you who are watching on YouTube, I'm looking across at me and I'm seeing a guy who's now a triathlete. Remember that. Remember that when you're thinking that, man, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how to handle this. Nick can run 26 months. Think about that. And you write a lot about executives who have that feeling of loneliness and that feeling of isolation. We like to believe no man is an island, but yeah, sometimes that's exactly what you are. And you can put yourself in that position. And you write a lot about that issue, and you discuss the stress that must cause. Tell us a little bit about that. I know you do coaching for executives in that position.
Yeah, so as I then was going through my recovery journey and I kept working on this and I became quite passionate about it and I really wanted to get well. And in this safe space, then I'm belonging to an anonymous group, but also talking to counselor and so on. And I really wanted to work on myself and I gave this time and the focus. I was getting so much positive energy and that I wanted to tell the world about it, but I didn't. I kept it still because I wanted to really go through this first and be ready to share it. So that was what happened. And that's when I thought I need to share this with someone. I started already then write, and I was very curious to also find out if other people had gone through this. And I wanted to know what is happening with other senior executives. So I did a survey of other senior executives where I wanted to ask them first about loneliness and stress and isolation and so on. And the findings then that I got was about, in 2019, was about 30% suffer from loneliness. And on the question is, if you then feel isolated and you have mental health issues, will you discuss it with your HR or your boss? 84% said that they would not discuss it in the company. And the follow-up question to this was, okay, well, will you then seek professional help? And 75% was no. And that was when I understood, well, that's exactly what happened to me. And I could have died. So that's why I thought I need to share this.
And those numbers are astounding. You think about that. I mean, so many people are suffering in silence. Is it because they feel like there's a stigma attached to it, that they don't want to be perceived as having any kind of mental health issue?
I would say that it's a combination between the stigma and fear. Stigma in the sense, yes, we're putting on a smile, and I call it in my book smiling depression, especially if you're a senior executive, you feel you have to hold it all together, you feel you need to look good, and you're supposed to be the one perhaps who's paid and given the big responsibility, you need to be the strong one. So that is the stigma part, but the fear is related to losing all we have. What about if someone find out? Will I lose my job? Will I be up for the next promotion? Will my bosses, look down on me? Will they not trust me anymore that I can do this job and so on? And that's the fear I had, and that's the fear I also saw in other executives.
They probably feel that their bosses will feel they can't handle the job, which is not true. They're human beings, and we really got to look at that. One of the things we talk about often on this show, and not just for executives, but guys who just working like you and me, and just regular, is about burnout. Is how people get to that point where they're so burnt out, they do what you did. They just quit. They can't handle it anymore. I've been in professions, and I have friends who are in professions that are very high stress, and whether they're first responders or they're teachers or they're nurses or and executives. There's a lot on the line, either personally or professionally. Either kids, people's lives, a lot of money. Those things can tend to put a lot of stress on people. But do you think that burnout is also partially due to that feeling of isolation?
Yes, and I think, as a human being and as an executive here, which we're talking about, I think we do everything we can first to cope. It will most often go a few years when we are dealing with that stress to the best of our ability, and that is normally picking up some kind of habit or bad habit or addiction. It can be gambling, it can be alcohol or any other form of drugs, or something that make us focus, the focus go away, or perhaps in my case also exercise is a good focus, but if that becomes an addiction also, that can perhaps be an issue. So I think we do everything we can to cope, but then eventually, this is compounding, and after perhaps a few years we break down and we collapse, which is what happened to me. And as you said, we cannot deal with it anymore. The only thing we can do is handing in the resignation, or we'd be hospitalized. I've seen in so many executives, especially during the pandemic, who were hospitalized because they're running companies in crisis mode, working from home, and it is indeed the isolation here. It's about the feeling that I'm alone with this. It's my responsibility. No one will understand me. I have no one to talk with about this, and nothing is further from the truth. It's just in our mind that this is there.
You brought up something that is an issue, and that's the pandemic. We've never seen anything like that before, at least not in my lifetime. And when it happened 100 years ago, they stopped work. That was it. They just stopped work. Now, in this pandemic, people were asked to continue working virtually, like you and I are speaking. By the way, those of you that are listening, Nick is in Singapore right now, and I'm in Florida. And I want to publicly thank him for getting up this early to talk to me. But anyway, the pandemic caused a lot of people to learn a new way of working, which is virtually, which I believe compounded that feeling of isolation. You can't even go into somebody's office and sit down and just, shoot the crap with them, because it has to be a scheduled talk. Do you think the pandemic exacerbated people's burnouts and stress levels?
I have looked into this quite a lot, Will, and I've seen both positive signs and negative signs here. On the negative side, I would say, especially for the introverts, I found that it was especially hard during the pandemic, because it seems like while they were very comfortable and saw this as a blessing to work from home, they normally would, and I'm an introvert myself, so that's why I also know this, that I really prefer to work alone in my office, and I could do this forever. But that is not to say that it's the best for me. If you look at the extroverts, though, during the pandemic, they were first in a bit of a panic mode. Oh my God, I cannot go to the coffee room, I cannot go to the office. But what happened is they found ways to socialize. Those would be the ones to arrange the Zoom parties, the welcome drinks. They would do everything they could to go out of the way to connect with other people. So they managed to go through it. But we introverts perhaps slowly was grinding down through it until we managed to break out. So that was on the challenging time. On the positive side, what I've seen is, and what I heard when I interviewed executives, is that many more ask for help, because suddenly it was okay to ask our staff and our employees, are you okay, and so on. And a lot of the psychologists I asked also started to do one-on-one coaching online, to the point that they almost burnt out, by the way. And but my point here is that so before you had to come to the studio, you had to go to perhaps to see someone in person. You were worried, and the stigma that someone will see you. Now you can do this calling anonymously. You can book a Zoom meeting like we are talking today, and have it in the comfort of your home, or locking the door to your office, and do it privately. And that's why so many more have finally asked for help.
That's a really, really interesting point that you made. And I never thought of it in those terms before, that it was harder on the introverts. And you would think on the surface, the introverts loved it. They didn't have to deal with people, but all the choice was taken away. If you're in the office and you don't feel like talking to somebody, you don't have to. But if you do feel like talking to someone, you can. If you're at home and you're an introvert, you're not used to making that much effort to just be able to talk to someone. So that put a lot of stress on people who it's not their nature to do that. Wow, that
Yeah.
was a really good point. I really had not thought about it that way. Okay, so one of the things I want you to know, you have been around everywhere. I don't know, you've been all over Europe, all over Asia, the United States. I mean, you've been everywhere. Culturally, any difference? The pandemic?
Yes. Yes, definitely a culture difference. And I can tell you in Singapore, where I live and work now, even a suicide attempt was a crime until 2019. It was only in January 1, 2020 when it was decriminalized. So that means if you had a family member or a friend or colleague who was talking about suicide, if you report it, then there'd be a police investigation. So that means that's how fresh that we can even have these conversations here. So you can imagine how much stigma it is around this topic.
Right. That's why I asked, Chris. In the States, it's a little bit too common, I think, but people are at least talking about it more often, and that's the first step to curing all this stuff. All right, so you've been all over. You've talked to a lot of people, a lot of executives, a lot of people in business. I would like to get your perspective of the effects of these enormous amounts of stress that have happened, especially in these last few years, the kinds of effects that you've seen happen on people, besides burnout, besides just quitting.
Well, I think, and we touched on this a bit earlier, I think addictions is becoming more of an issue. And people, again, find their own addictions in order to escape life, in order to escape the issues and the stress and the pressures of the work. And there's so much uncertainty also around the works. We live in a gig economy. Companies merge, acquires quicker. People are losing their jobs and they are quite scared. I mean, gone are the days when you work 30, 40 years for the same company. You don't have that level of security anymore. So people need to cope with this. And and very commonly, I think people naturally can easily go for a drink. It's socially accepted. That's how I socialize. It's a good thing to go and have a few drinks after beer. This becomes a bad habit. But it's also what we have with us every day. Our devices is full of apps and we become addicted to those, and social media. So indeed, it's not going in the right way in this sense.
Well, I agree with that. In fact, our magazine Contentment, which just recently came out, was all about technology. I've always said it's the greatest tool and the greatest bane of our existence. Technology is, I mean, it makes you and I able to talk to each other, and it makes people a slave to our technology. I want to ask you something. I looked at one of your articles that you've written, and it was called 5 Quick Ways to Ease Stress, Depression, and Anxiety. Tell us some of those ways. People need to, they're there, people. You have to know that you're not stuck, you're not broken. There are ways to do things, and guys like Nick can absolutely help us. So I hate to put you on the spot, but you wrote the article.
Yeah, it actually was part of my book, and but it is also as a summary report out there. But what it is it's the 5 steps or the summaries of what I went through to turn my life around, and I'm very happy to talk you through briefly those 5 steps if you like.
Please.
Yeah, so the first step here was taking stock. So remember when I told you, I told my wife, I told my doctor, we told a friend, and what I then had to do at that stage was really take a look at myself and writing down what are the issues I'm having. I was overweight, I lost my health, I didn't exercise, I kept things to myself, there was broken relationships. I had to write all of that down. Just like you are a shop owner, you do a stock take perhaps every quarter or once a year. That is what I need to do, and I need to be very honest with myself. So that was the first step.
Okay, I agree. The first step is recognizing there's a problem and taking stock of that problem. What else can you do?
then what I did then at that stage was getting ready to ask for help, because I really had not asked anyone for help. So once I had that list of the issues I had to basically create a new column where I could say, okay, I have an issue with nutrition. Who can I ask for advice? I have an issue with my blood pressure. Well, it's a doctor. So I need to link all of those. And then I needed to basically get ready to take action on those, on all those things.
Under a doctor's or a coach's supervision? Yeah. I think that's a good idea.
And on that list, about half of them were perhaps professional services, others were anonymous support. There's a lot of charities, a lot of volunteers, and not everything of this has to cost money. And yeah, a lot of it was friends who could help me, to give me some guidance. So that really set me on the right path. I started to see, okay, I have these issues. Well, here are the people who can help me solve that.
What did those people tell you? What kinds of things?
Yeah, so the step 3 then was getting healthy. So I needed to really get well internally, because I was in the state where I thought the body is breaking down here because of the alcohol addiction and so on. So it was really, the nutritionist and getting an exercise plan. I got a fitness coach who helped me install an app on my phone who tracked me, so I could start going for a 5-kilometer walk per day. I felt progress. We increased this and so on. So really the third step indeed was getting healthy. And then the fourth step was nurturing healthy relationships, because once you've been isolating yourself for a few years and you've been abusing alcohol like I had broken relationships. I couldn't deal with it, and I had to go back in the fourth step to make amends and apologize to the people I had hurt, so that I could heal myself internally from that.
I think that's a real important point to make, that the kinds of friends you surround yourself with is the world you live in. And so I think finding those people that were supportive, that really helped you get through all of that. And what was the last thing? Number 5.
Yeah, so the fifth one, and this is very much important, especially if you are an executive, it's finding your purpose. And what I realized when I looked at why did I crash, well, it was too much about my ego. It was too much about me getting the promotions, me getting the titles, and titling myself and so on. And as I did my survey and interviews for the book, I realized that this was quite common in senior executives. So it's really looking around ourselves here in step 5 and looking for our purpose. Is there a bigger meaning here? Is there a power greater than myself in the universe, or is everything circulating around me? So it's really deflating your ego here in the last one.
That's a good point. Something I got to tell you that I've seen that problem before. You can't be really successful without an ego, but you can overinflate your ego to the point where it takes over everything you do, and that you'll fail. It won't happen. I guess there's a fine line between being an egomaniac and being a confident person, and discovering the right one takes some doing, takes some contemplation, takes some listening to guys like you, and reading your book. Nick, what is our takeaway here? People out there who are working, who are stressed, and they do those 5 things. What's the last thing you would tell these people? We're running a little short on time, but I don't want to go over too much. But what would you tell people that are struggling now, and any worker, not just executives?
If there's one takeaway from all of this, and my key message would be that if you have something on your mind, no matter how big the problem is, think about immediately who you can share it with. Can be anything from a friend, a colleague, or it can be a professional coach or a psychologist or a therapist, anyone. Or if you don't find anyone, call a hotline. Call one of the anonymous hotlines and share your issue. Someone will listen, and you will be on your way of recovery right away.
I think that's really good advice. Don't try going it alone. Is it possible? Sure. Is it probable? I don't know. Everyone is different. But I'll tell you one thing, when you have somebody who's coaching you, who can help you along, like Nick, it certainly makes that journey a lot easier and a lot more doable. So don't think that this is all impossible. Nick Jonsson did it. You can do it. Just, come out of alcoholism, come out of that feeling that you're so stressed out, that you're burnt out, that you can't find that passion, you don't really feel it anymore. I understand. So does Nick. And there are ways to deal with it. Nick, thank you so much for taking the time and getting up so early in Singapore to join us. I really, really appreciate it. All of you out there need to take a look at Nick's book. I'm sure you can find it. He'll tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure you can find it on Amazon. I mean, isn't everything on Amazon? I buy my vitamins on Amazon. Anyway, Nick gave me the thumbs up. You can't find it. Whatever you do, go to nickjonsson.com. I perused his website. He has a lot of articles, a lot of podcasts. There's a lot of information there. So go there, find out the cure for executive loneliness. You'll find that, like I said, on Amazon. All right, that's going to do it for today. This has been your host, Will Heckman. I want to thank you all for joining us again today. Don't forget to please follow this podcast. Hit that like, hit that thumbs up button, hit the little bell. And remember, your support helps us to keep making these podcasts and all that we do at the American Institute of Stress possible. To go to stress.org, subscribe to our magazines, look at all the stuff that we have. And I want to remind everyone, just as stress is different for each of us, there is no one stress reduction or management strategy that is right for everyone. So that means you need to join us next time as we explore more stress management strategies and insights. And again, remember to visit us at stress.org, and you'll find some tools and techniques to help you live a happier and healthier life, and hope the information that you heard from Nick and myself today starts you on that journey. Good day, everyone.